Hello, everybody, to yet another LinkedIn Live with me, Sham Sadasivan. Delighted to be here today with yet another guest I've been waiting and wanting to invite for quite a long time. Her work on LinkedIn, her work in tech, her work in AI, the work she's doing with women for women has been something I've been following for a while, including her LinkedIn posts, her recent involvement in the Creator Accelerator program. There's so much I want to ask her. So we're going to get started in just a moment. Folks, if you're here with us, please let us know in the comments. Say hello. Let us know you're here, and we'd love to hear from you. Hear your questions, comments as we begin. It's great to see so many of you already with us in the in the in the window that I see here. Okay, so I'm going to be inviting Ranjini Mani in here in just a moment, right after this. Hello, Ranjini. How are you today?
Hey Shyam, such a pleasant evening, and it's glad to be here. Glad to meet all of you who've joined in, like on the evening as well. Yeah, I know Shyam, you mentioned you follow my posts, I follow your posts. I love all the stuff you put out around coaching as well. So it's mutual, right? So super glad to be here today.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. I mean, that is true, right? I mean, we met on LinkedIn, didn't we? And these are
Yeah,
some of these, amazing encounters that we've had on LinkedIn. And then, we haven't met yet. So we'll figure that out later. We're going live before we've ever met. We'll figure out a face-to-face meeting at some point for sure. I'm
yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
Folks are saying hi in the comments. Ranjini, Anupriya, Lopamudra, Mallika, all saying hello. Hello, folks. Great
So,
that you're here with us today. Ranjini, I'm just gonna, just dive right in really. And
yeah.
people who are here with us today are, I'm sure, curious to hear your thoughts on, how to support women to grow into AI leadership roles, which is what we've called our talk today. And it's a chat, right? And I'm very happy to dive into this with you. And folks, if you're here, please, any questions, any thoughts, any comments, just put it in, and we'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll try to weave it into our conversation as we go along. So let me kick off with a question, Ranjini. Just kind of enlighten us. What is the real situation with regard to gender representation in AI? Just that area of technology right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring together like a couple of things which I'm super passionate about, Shyam. I love technology, AI. I love talking about how do you get women to reach their potential. So this is like a culmination of everything I'm passionate about. So thanks for doing this, right?
Super.
Um, so yeah, to your question, how is that representation of women in AI? I would say abysmal, right? To be very
Mm.
honest, think of it like a funnel, right? I think it's starts with even like think about women in the workforce and then women in tech. And then further, you look at women in AI and ML, which is further down, right? And then
So
finally, women in AI and ML who are in leadership. I think that kind of narrows down as you move forward.
tech, tech AI leadership, the funnel. Yeah.
Yeah, even women in workforce, even before women in tech. We tend to think of women only in tech, but there are women in workforce. My mom worked a very non-tech job. Both my parents came from they did BA, MA, right, literature background. So I'm very cognizant that there are women outside of this as well. So yeah, my point is that funnel narrows substantially. I'm sure it narrows across genders, but then for women it narrows substantially, right? And if I have to put statistics behind it, I think the numbers I remember reading is from a World Economic Forum report, and they had called out that women make only 26% in the AI and data positions in workforce, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is globally. Now, if you were to put in a geography, that's further going to reduce across geographies. And this is not even thinking about leadership roles, right? So it is definitely a space where there's very little representation, and definitely, like we've discussed in the past, the implications. It's not just the representation small. What are the implications of this, right?
Such a
That
good
what
point.
we think about as well. Yeah.
Such a good point, right? Two things I picked up already. One is the funnel of workforce to tech to AI to leadership, and it's just getting narrower and narrower. The
Correct.
24% is in tech, is it?
26%. 26% of data and AI positions in the workforce, I believe, based on the World Economic Forum report, is women, right?
Is
So yeah, that's the number.
So, Great point. What is the implication? So what, as they say in marketing, right? I mean, so
Worked,
so
right?
what actually happens as a result of the situation?
Yeah, no, first of all, the broader point is around not just women in AI, women in tech, or women in workforce in general, right? I think
Yep.
it's proven by research, not just that diversity is a good to have, but must have, right, in terms of improving your bottom line. There's multiple research which kind of shows that, right? So that's one. Now, that's in general, right? Not just in AI. Now, coming to AI in itself, why is it more relevant? I would say there are multiple reasons again, but for me, two things strikes out, right? One, again, I remember reading that, in general, we are very concerned about areas which could get automated as we move into the future. And
Yes.
these tend to be jobs which are monotonous, routine jobs, like probably, manual entry jobs, things like that, right? I think the research called out that as jobs get automated, it's going to impact women more than men because they are in such jobs, right? Now that is startling because first of all, getting them into the workforce is hard. Now you're kind of automating jobs which they're already in, right? And that
Oh, very
happens
interesting.
because they are not probably in jobs which are around AI or tech, right? Which have probably lesser automation capability. There may be areas where it may not be automated. So that's one, right? The point being that there are jobs which could get automated, and that's going to impact women more. So that's one. And the second thing, which there's a lot of research on, is bias, introducing bias, right? So I very strongly believe that technology should represent the diversity of the population in itself. And if you do not have women represented, how do you build technology? How do you build AI systems without taking like the opinions of 50% of your
Yeah,
population, right? So that
exactly.
astounds me
Exactly.
as well. Yeah.
I think I read that report, the World Economic Forum report, and I also was looking at some other things about medical research. So the
Yeah.
World Economic Forum research talks about things like automotive design, where
Mm,
even the seatbelt design is not
yeah.
really suitable for the, I think, the gender differences in our bodies. And
Yeah.
remember, look at medication. Even almost all medication research has never
Mm,
actually taken into account the
yeah.
differences, in the physiology between genders. I think most of the medicines that we've had for like decades now are, I think, the research is only on male subjects, which is actually very interesting because it's the differences have
Oh,
not been considered at all, right?
yeah.
It's fascinating
And
area, fascinating area.
correct, correct. No, absolutely. There's so many such examples, Shyam. And also, see, one thing I'm very cognizant of it is the way it is because of history, right? And historically, it's
Yeah,
been that way.
yeah,
Our world has been
yes,
that way. There's a very solid reason why it's that way. And I'm also glad that we're having these conversations about awareness of changing it, right? So that's very
correct,
important. Now,
correct, correct.
two things which we don't even question, right? Like I was reading similar to what you called out, the AC temperature in offices, right? I think that's one thing which they call out is it is suited for men, not necessarily for women. So
Yeah,
if I felt this, right, it's like, why am I always freezing?
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's probably because
It's
we
a very
haven't done
It's a
that,
very,
right?
very interesting topic. And I'm just going to ask all of you folks, thank you, Shivkant, Malika, Lopamudra, Anupriya, thank you for saying hello. Everyone else, please say hello. And then tell us, please, what is on your mind, um, the reason of the current state of affairs? Where do you think it comes from? What's the provenance, as they say? What's the source of the situation? Anshuman, hi, welcome. Good to have you with us. Let's take that conversation further, Anjali, right? So, we're saying that, as you say, you use the word abysmal, so I'm going to go with that.
Yeah.
The representation is abysmal in AI. And there are, whatever reason and history is uh, that has led us to this situation, right?
Yeah.
So today, if a woman or a young girl in college or school wants to pursue a career in tech slash AI, is it hard? Is it easy? What's going on right now?
Yeah. Um, now that's a good question, and I'll probably contextualize this in general, right? Because even before it becomes an AI problem, it's just generally a women in tech problem, right? So, what challenges do women face building a career in tech in itself? And I feel like it's not a straightforward answer; it's a very convoluted solution because there are multiple touch points to this, right? So uh, I've heard from so many friends who I have a 7-year-old. So when I had my peers who have having kids at that time, there are so many stories I hear about, challenges in getting back to work or getting back to work and cannot getting demoted, not having the role that you had earlier. having pressure from your family to kind of take care of the kid, because raising a kid is still the mom's prerogative largely, right?
Mm,
There's this unconscious bias which kind of comes and creeps in. Staying relevant, upskilling, and
mm,
all of that, you need time, but time is always a scarce resource for women, right? So I think it's a combination of these factors, and including the larger root cause around conditioning, right? How we condition, how as a society do we treat and raise our kids differently? It's the combination of all of this, yeah, right? So it's no straight answer to this problem.
yeah.
But again, I am a very optimistic person in general, right? And I feel like largely there's a change in the narrative. Even over the last 5, 10 years, I see that, right? I see that personally. And I thankfully have been part of organizations and worked with leaders who value diversity as not just the right thing to do, but also one which makes business sense, right?
Mhm.
That I think that's something which I'm very happy about, right? So
Mm.
that's the context to the challenges, if that helps.
So just to add a more positive twist to it, are things improving right now? Do you think, from the way you see the world?
Absolutely, absolutely. If
Yeah.
you think about it, even right now, you mentioned for like young college students and all of that, right? I remember talking to this young girl just out of college. She started this community meetup on her own. The first thing she told me, you know what? I don't want to get married when I'm 22. I want to do something. And she was an AI, right? So she started this thing where she had a meetup. This was in like one of the tier two towns, right? She started meeting people. She built out a portfolio. She started reaching out to industry experts, and she got landed herself a good job as a data engineer, right? So I think the
Yeah.
sense of agency which a lot of youngsters show, the sense of opportunity we have, all of that
Brilliant.
is really heartening, right? And that didn't exist like less than a decade ago, also. So
No,
yeah,
I didn't.
it's
Yeah.
positive.
Doctor, engineer, that's it.
I know my parents gave me exactly those two choices, right? So I'm glad
Yeah.
that that's changing. Yeah.
Yeah, doctor, engineer. I mean, I did spend some time in the north, but if I'd continued my life in the north, maybe IAS would have been. It was not really that much of an option for me when I moved to the south, but it was literally doctor, engineer, and I can't sign. I'll faint at the sight of blood, so I took engineering. I grew to like some parts of it, so thank God. but but the options available, that's a very interesting point, because what you're saying is there's agency now
Mm,
with people who probably did not have it, gender wise, girls,
yeah.
young women.
Mm,
um, if I was to just kind of take the other gender perspective, men have too many options. So suddenly it's gone like totally nuts. They were generally allowed to kind of explore and think, and they now have like a million things they could do. So there's a problem of choice overload, as well, which I'm sure is available to everybody on many things in life. But then it
mm.
manifests itself in so many different ways. I mean, having choice is good, but too much choices can be a bad thing too.
Yeah, I think in general, again, I don't know how much of this is gender specific. In general, I feel like as a country, we have matured so that we don't say, oh, okay, this is the straight laced path you should follow. You should do an engineering degree, get a job, get married, have kids. I think now people are okay with kind of taking, different options, maybe dropping out, doing something, failing, coming back. I think all of this has become acceptable, which probably is the reason why the narrative is changing a bit, right? But on
Hmm.
the topic, I'd love to ask you, Shyam, right? You
So,
spoke about challenges. I know you coach a lot of women as well, and you probably coach
uh,
women in tech, right? So, what do you hear as areas of challenge?
areas of challenge. So I spend a lot of time with mid-career professionals, right? So I've spent time with people coming back to work,
Right.
or trying to balance work with personal commitments and things, with children, with families.
Yeah.
Um, Coming back to work continues to be stigmatic, right?
Yeah.
And this is, by the way, not. It is just that I think there is more emphasis on understanding the challenge of women coming back to work after
Yeah.
childbirth, but
Mm,
men taking a break, or maybe being out of work, there is a huge stigma to coming back to work. That is
mm,
one thing that is, I think, a really large problem, where
yeah.
especially in India, I see that is a massive, massive stigma. Having a year's break, it's almost like you don't have the right to take a break. You're
Mm,
almost like you're on the treadmill. You got to be on the treadmill. You cannot get off. You got to
mm,
somehow be in it in some way or form, and then it has to be an upward trajectory. But careers have changed. Careers are like all over the place, right? Left, right, vertical, lateral, sideways, all over the place. People make all kinds of changes and do all
yeah.
kinds of things. I think
Yeah.
the tolerance of these shifts, and tolerance of being a little off, a little off from the traditional step-by-step career path, I think the tolerance of that is increasing. I think
Mm,
awareness is increasing that people can come back and still be functional, still take on from where they left off,
mm,
continue from where they left off. Maybe they need some help, maybe they need some support. I think empathy as an idea in the corporate world is better
mm.
than, be a man and, that whole, get on with it and figure it out. And, you gotta almost that kind of toxic positivity of, you'll figure it out and spend 18 hours a day and you'll be okay again. I think COVID at least made us think a lot more about how balanced we need to be. So the way I see it is, I think things are generally improving, but my view of the world is very white collar, metro, corporate. Okay, so I'm speaking for that demographic, right?
Yeah.
And the world is a much larger place than that. So I want to qualify my answer by saying that that is my kind of view of the world.
Yeah, no, I think you raise a very pertinent point, right? Even as a woman, I know that I speak from a position of privilege, right? It's not just that
Exactly.
I'm doing it because I want to, I also am able to, right? I just have so much of support. So I think it's very important to acknowledge the privilege from where you speak. I want to add two more points to what you called out, Sham, before we move on, right? Now, I don't have solutions to this, but I do want to acknowledge that this exists, right? One, there are a lot of women I've spoken to who probably, Ivy League colleges, they worked for 4, 5 years, dropped off, took a sabbatical for around 7, 8 years, then want to come back to the workforce once their children have grown up, right? Now, once they come back, first of all, getting back to the workforce, all said and done, is still a challenge, right? Two, at what level do they come back? They still have to come back at a junior level, right? Given that they are still learning things, it's everything is new, so they're probably going to upskill and come back. Now that means that they're starting off again from scratch, right? So that is very pertinent to consider, right? The other point is. We talk a lot about bringing women back into tech, which is very important. We should still have that conversation. But do we have enough conversation around scaling women into leadership, right? And that I feel is a place where there's not enough dialogue because as a hiring manager I see this day in day out, right? Like hiring for someone fresh out of college, yes, you probably have some options, but hire someone with like 7, 8 years experience, it's such a challenge to find. There's so much of dropout after a point in time, right? So making sure that you can sustain and grow, have a pathway into leadership is also something which is both the organization as well as the women's prerogative, I would say, right? So that's another thing I wanted to call out. Yeah.
Agreed. I think the whole longevity, and I was just having this conversation literally today with a client, and we were
Mm,
going deeper into the idea of what is a career. First of
correct.
all, you speak about privilege.
Mm,
What is privilege? Privilege is actually something you don't have to think about, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm in my home. I have the privilege that I don't have to think about my power and
Mm,
water and more generally speaking, I have a privilege of having the basics covered. In the
mm,
same way, we have a privilege of having a career. 90 something percent of the world does not have a career. They have
yeah,
jobs. And
yeah.
what differentiates a job and a career is the privilege that you have a longevity to it. It's a long-term commitment to doing something. I choose
Mm,
AI as a career. I chose coaching as a career. It means
mm,
that I will do something long-term and not just worry about, paycheck to paycheck, day to day.
yeah.
So I think that notion of a career, notion of doing something long-term, these are all
Mm,
just one things we should be conscious of the fact that we are, as you just said, privileged to actually be talking about. So
mm,
that's a great,
yeah, yeah.
uh,
The big point is what are we doing in order to
yeah, yeah,
lean forward and have that privilege, right? Which I think is around
yes,
this conversation, right?
yes,
Creating
yes, yes,
awareness, helping out, bringing forth that opportunities. I think that
correct,
is something
correct.
which all of us owe as a responsibility to the society. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And we have a responsibility to kind of include what we may have missed. So Malika has, shared
Mm,
that she relates with the examples of how women were excluded from research for a long time. And I would
mm,
like to think, see, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I would like to think that it was just the way it was done. I mean, it was not intentional in that sense. I would like to think that, right? I wasn't there, I don't know. But if we can do something, and as a coach I'm always forward focused, I'm always looking at what to do next and what to do better and
mm,
what we can actually do to improve. What is
mm.
it, what are the steps we can take, right? So
Mm.
that is another exploration. I have so many questions for you, but are you ready to take questions from our lovely guests?
Sure. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's kick off with comments or questions. I mean, Lopamudra has said, women often face a continuous battle for credibility, especially while taking up new projects and assignments. What has your experience been, and what advice do you have?
Yeah, I do want to make sure I understand this right. Women often face a continuous battle for credibility. So what I'm interpreting is, kind of having to prove the worth of what we are doing, and that seems to be a challenge, right? Especially in new areas.
Absolutely. Mm.
Yeah, no, I hear where Lopamudra is coming from. I do want to acknowledge that, right? So I think there are two aspects to it. One, I would say putting the burden of proving credibility only on the individual itself is probably a very shallow thing to do, right? Like, it's easy to say, oh, you know what, try harder, make a better case. But it's not just the person's, not just women's prerogative. I think it's a combined effort, one from the organization side and one from the individual's perspective. So I'm going to take it from both ends, right? From the organization in itself, I think it starts at the top is something which I've felt sharp, right? Generally, diversity, inclusion, everything around this, it starts at the top, right? So as leaders, it's our individual prerogative to kind of set the right precedents, right? So for example, even simple things like inclusion. I remember one of these inclusion trainings I was on. One example this woman highlighted in the training was how, in some use case, the woman in the team was always called out to be the person taking notes, right? So that's a very
I understand.
subconscious thing. Like you said, people are not bad, but it's in very inadvertent, but it's still, something which is a bias per se, right? So calling out those biases, calling out those challenges is something the leader is something I would say will have to set the culture around, right? And that's the same thing with respect to this, right? In terms of, why is it that the proving the value becomes harder for the women, right? So that is something. Do we treat them the same way on the merit of the outcome in itself, right? Not to make it easier for one versus the other, but do we treat it without bias on the merit of the outcome of the project versus who brings it? I think that's very very important as a culture to set up. Now again, it's there at different extents in different places depending on the leaders, but that's one, right? The
Sure.
second thing is the woman in itself, right? I think personally, because Lopamudra is asking for my experience, I have, again, I'm making a very bold statement, but I've never let my gender define what I should or shouldn't do, right? There
Hmm.
are points in time where I probably think I'm like 60% qualified for what I should be doing. I would still go ahead and put it forth, right?
Yes.
Because if I self reject, like even before I try it, if I self reject, that's a no, right? I'll
Yeah.
try it. If
Not.
they say that's a no, that's fine, right? But I think that's something which I've done consciously over and over and over again. And it's easy said than done. Yes, failure is not something everyone is good with. But I think over a period of time, you start to look at it in terms of another way in which you shouldn't be doing it, right? So I would say put yourself out there. Personally, my experience has been that I would still put myself out there in terms of getting that new experience, right? So yeah, that's my take on this.
Lovely. I'll just add one bit on credibility because I spend a lot of time on, training sessions on trust and credibility. And some
Hmm.
of my favorite readings are from Stephen M. R. Covey's, Eva Covey's work on fast trust. If you haven't read the book, please do check it out. Speed of Trust, where they talk about trust being, credibility being a combination of character and competence, right? And character comes from things like, talking straight, talking directly, speaking the truth, fixing things, righting wrongs, and all of that. And competency, of course, comes from doing the work well, confronting reality of the situations, clarifying expectations, improving, getting better, keeping commitments, and so on. So I find that a really interesting model. Character is what we think of us, and competence is what we can do. And he talks about credibility being a combination of the two. So you try to identify where it is that you're having possibly a challenge. Is it about saying that you are not the right fit for the role, or is it about the capability, um, and that the reputation that you have with them? Because one of the I read it in my marketing days, Ranjani, when I did my MBA. Rees and Trout wrote this thing long time ago in Marketing 101, literally Marketing 101, which says that, you know, rep, marketing is not about changing perceptions. It is about
Yeah.
taking advantage of perceptions that already exist. So it's about
Mm.
understanding what people think and seeing what can you do, one step, one step, one step, right? And
Yeah.
trying to kind of influence them and trying to see where to go. So, for example, I've been in that situation when I was junior, and I don't think it is definitely, as you said, possibly a gender influenced kind of bias. But I've been the note taker for a long time in meetings, and it is one thing to say I will no longer take notes, but it is another thing to say, okay, now can I, do something with it, and can I grow into another role? Can I now be the person running the meeting, and kind of finding your way out of that into something bigger, better, cooler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the point you called out around what was the book again, Shyam? I would love to
Speed of
always,
trust. The
yeah.
speed of trust. Yes.
Right. I think that self-assessment is something which is very essential, right? Even before we move to actions, I think reflection around why it is the way it is. I think that's a great point which you called out.
Yes, to understand what's
Um,
causing that, so you can
yeah,
kind of address that systemic. If there's a systemic issue,
correct.
if you constantly see that it's a particular person or particular gender or particular seniority level who's always doing things in a certain way, calling it
Mhm.
out takes character, and it actually sends a great message that you will not stand up for this
Yeah.
stuff, for the lack of a better word.
And some one of these hacks, for lack of a better word, which one of my mentors had mentioned, is keeping this document. She called it like your personal
Yeah.
document, personal journal,
Yes.
personal
Yeah.
champion journal. I think that's what she called it. So basically, she said, as you kind of do things, be it good or if you get critical feedback, kind of keep a document of it over time, right? So what happens is, oh, you
My
do. All
tattered little book. My tattered little book. It's all torn from years of writing in it.
No, that's great, right? So I think that's a great exercise because it
It
helps
is.
you to self-reflect, right? So if you've kind of done something great, put it down, write it down, and then also list out why is it that worked out well, right? And the same
Yeah.
thing, if you get feedback, put it down, write down like what actions you're taking, and then see how you improve over time. I think over that time, it helps you in tremendous ways. Apart from like the self-reflection, it also helps you have conversations with your leaders, right? I think I usually go with like a list of things. This is what I've done. This is where I think I should improve. So even before someone tells me this is what you should do, I go with a list of this is where I think I should improve.
Yeah.
I'll be doing this, right? So
That
I think
introspection, self-reflection, and on that
yeah,
point, I'm just going to show that I'm going to bring us back to topic in just a second.
I,
Okay, but I want to say, this is something I wrote so long ago. There is more to life than increasing its speed. I saw
uh,
it in a poster in a London tube station, and it was attributed to Mahatma Gandhi. I don't know if it is him, but there is, and this really slowed me down in my tracks. And I said, you know what, I'm going to take things a bit slowly now.
quote.
um,
No, it's a really beautiful quote. Yeah.
really, isn't it? It's attributed to Mahatma Gandhi, but I really kind of try to slow things down and get better with my own thinking. Hey, let's
Mm.
go to I hope I'm saying your name right, Arani Dhar. She's asking best way to network with colleagues in a remote environment, because okay, let me talk about networking, and I'm going to ask you, Ranjini, to give us tips, right?
Mm.
I have tended to feel really alone in a remote environment.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about supporting women to grow or supporting anyone to do anything, there is a
Yeah.
sense of connection that is required to do anything together. And that is, really, really hard in a remote virtual working environment. So how are you doing it, Ranjini? Yes, please.
Oh, this is like a favorite topic of mine,
Oh,
right?
really? Fantastic.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And it's something which I've tried to become better over time. It's not natural for me to kind of go out and network. But okay, so here's the thing, right? I think I read this quote somewhere maybe that people think of networking when they want something, right? Oh, I need a referral, so let me go network. So the number of DMs I get in terms of, what, can you just do this? Can you find out a role for me and then refer me? I don't even know this person, right? So it is very difficult to kind of do that type of networking. That doesn't work. That is focused on take versus give, right? Good networking starts with give, and I think that's something I want to really call out. Starts with give and starts with building relationships. You don't start with the, oh, I want this, so therefore give me that, right? So that's one. And the second thing I want to call out is network before you have to. I don't think you should think of it as, oh, I want a job, so let me network. You network for the sake of it, like where you can learn from build relationships, learn from people. I think that's the mindset one should start with even before, getting into it. So that's one, right? Now, the second thing is how do you go about it? And that's where I feel sometimes people struggle a lot, right? In general, some people are more introverted. And I think with women specifically, Shyam, this is one thing I've heard, right? There's this belief of am I taking up their time? What in case I take up their time? That's something which comes up, right? I'm just asking them for a favor. Why will they give me the time? So that exists a lot. But in general, I believe that many people are more than happy to kind of spend the time if you're clear about the asks, right? If you're clear about it. Because, like, personally, even I love to do this. I do it on weekends whenever possible because I leave every conversation learning something myself, right? So I feel like it's worth the time as well,
Yes.
right? So how do you go about it? The last part of it is, first of all, one thing I started doing is to have coffee chats with people who I haven't spoken to, met, right? This is within the organization, outside the organization. Helped me tremendously, right? I learned things like Web3, what is happening in crypto, what's happening in blockchain, just a wide variety of topics, right? So it's hugely beneficial. But before you go, though, I think we should make some homework, right? So figure out what is it about that person which you mutually understand or
Yeah.
relate to. So for example, Shyam, maybe if I talk to you, I would say, oh, I'm
Yes.
interested in understanding about books. I'm interested in understanding about how you coach high performing individuals. Like, what are the things which you do? And then start the conversation. I call it like the elevator pitch in terms of, identifying who you are and then talking about what you have come across in their profile which is attracting to you, and then talk about what is it that you would like to connect with them about, right? Like, that's a good 3 point template in terms of reaching out to people if you're looking at networking. But be clear about what you want out of the discussion. I hate it when people just come saying, oh, in general I want to talk about life, which is okay, but it's not generally a win-win for both of them, right? So
True.
yeah,
True.
long-winded answer. Clearly you see my
Oh,
passion.
I've highlighted the Nuggets network before you have to. I put it in the comments, and three people have liked it already. And you also said give first and then take, which is another Stephen Covey thing of emotional deposits. That
Hmm.
is, offer deposits first, only then you withdraw. You can't open
Yeah.
a bank account today and just withdraw money. You got to put something in there. So networking largely, I think, is probably misunderstood as something that you take. But be intentional, be clear who you want to network with, and then when you network, you give. And giving sometimes, I even wrote a post about it recently. Somebody said, actually somebody asked me in a live, how do you network with somebody more senior?
Mm.
What do I have to give? And to be honest, you can literally just say something nice about something they did, something about their company, drop them a message, say, I read this in news, congratulations. Why not? It is just a message to somebody saying, I noticed something about you and it was interesting, I liked it. Like, you write a book review and somebody says, hey Ranjani, that was really great, it helped me and I picked this up. It takes like a second to do, and that is also networking, isn't it? And over
Yeah,
time you can
yeah,
you can get to know the person.
absolutely. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be. So I've reached out to people who are like SVP in sales, right? Like a completely different domain from myself, and tell them, you know what, I love what you're doing in terms of getting more women into the space because sales again is a very low density for women kind of space, right? So I love what you're doing there. And then we have had conversation around leadership principles, how she kind of
Yeah,
moved her career into that trajectory, right? General things like this, which helps
it's
me a lot,
conversation
right?
going. Yeah, which gets the conversation going. I mean, when I got my first mentor, I was advised to ask my mentor what they want out of the relationship, because they might want something. And to be honest, my first mentor said, I'd love to see. He was in the same company, totally different job, and
Mm.
very senior. And he said, I would like to know how you see the company right now, because that perspective is important to me. So in our mentoring conversations, it used to be like 75% he was giving me tips and advice, and all 25% I was telling him how I saw the world, and that was useful to him. So always giving is a great
Yeah,
way to work.
absolutely. Yeah.
We have a comment from Komal says, I agree to the point of career break. I presume, Komal, you're talking about the challenges of coming back from a career break, and also gender pay gap plays an important role while talking about this, even when women are doing jobs and especially when they come back. Yeah. So pay gap. Do you want to talk about do you want to take a pay gap and have a stab at that chestnut?
Yeah. Yeah, this is another area which is called out as a challenge, right? I don't have numbers around it, but I definitely think there's a disparity in terms of pay at equal levels, right? And again, this I feel it has historically been the way it is, which is why it's there. But then that is narrowing down, right? Now, again, one other thing around pay gap. Again, I remember someone telling me this is. Um, Women hesitate in asking for a raise, and this I've heard so many times, right? It's very uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable when I have to have a raise conversation, right? It is almost like,
Same
oh,
here.
I'm being selfish, I'm
Yes.
asking for more, right? But you know what? Unless you do that, it's like you may still do that and you ask for X, you get less than X. That's perfectly fine, right? But if you
Yeah,
believe, and this is not just ask for the sake of asking, right? No, but if you believe that you deserve something, I definitely think that you raise your hand, go ahead and have that conversation, right? It is going to be uncomfortable. You may still get pushed back and say, no, this is why it is. But you're going to have that self respect, right? And I think that's very important. Respecting your opinions and speaking up for yourself is something which we all owe for each other, right?
correct,
So
correct,
I think that's something which I would highly recommend we do. Ask
correct.
for ask for what you think you deserve. Yeah.
Yes. And you know what? That is the character part of that trust, character plus competence. So if you
Mm,
speak up for what's right, if
yeah.
you speak up, and by the way, none of this is about being rude or arrogant or anything. It is basically saying, this situation is not exactly optimal. Can I
Mm,
talk to you about it? And I want to bring this to your notice respectfully, with trust, with character. But that is exactly what Stephen Covey talks about in character. Character is about righting the wrongs, bringing
yeah.
up and actually discussing what might be off in the moment, and
Yeah.
ensuring that you do actually put it on the table for a discussion, and not
Yeah.
just kind of putting up with it. So,
And,
and if
and I
you
think,
mm,
sorry, go ahead, Sham, complete your thought.
and if you need help with that, that's when you can get some mentoring, coaching, whatever, to be able to have that conversation, because that conversation is for you to have, not for somebody else, right? And that is how
Yeah.
you show character. But if you need
Correct.
help to do so, you can reach out and get some help to formulate that dialogue, please.
No, I wanted to say, while it's easy for me to say that, right? I'm very aware that it's not an easy thing to do, right? People are at different situations, environments, and it may not be as easy, right? So I do want to call out like two things. Again, this is stuff which is spoken about widely as well. One, like as they say, the board of advisors. Build a board of advisors for yourself. Now, this may not be mentors. It could be people you reach out to say, you know what, this is something. I'm taking this decision. Am I doing the right thing or wrong? For example, one of my mentors, I was telling her about a decision I was taking, and then she asked me just one thing, right? She's like, are you moving away from something or are you moving towards something? Because if you're taking a decision because you're moving towards something, that's a good thing.
Yes.
Now, even that
Yes.
simple thing was so helpful for me, right? So I think it's so important to have that motive. And that's why I said relationships, right? You need to build relationships. That's when you can reach out to people over time. So that's one, right? Second thing, within your organizations, build allies. It's very important. Now you can say, oh, you know what, one person probably is not really
Mhm.
cooperative, but then if you have a set of allies, you can always reach out to other folks to kind of get inputs in terms of what works within your environment, right? Which someone outside may not have. So I think those two, building allies and board of advisors, I would highly recommend as well.
Absolutely, board of advisors great. Having help from others, you don't do it alone, as
Yeah.
I keep saying. And that beautiful thing you said about moving away from something or moving towards something. That's exactly what my last guest, Coach Ram, said, as a way
Mm.
of as a mental model.
Hmm.
Because and for example, Shubham has said something here about it feels easy to switch at times than to ask for a raise and keep waiting, which is absolutely right. But
Yeah.
here's the point, Ranjani's point: are you moving away and switching because you don't feel okay asking for a raise? Then you are maybe not doing it for the right reasons, right? So asking for a raise and then moving, fine. You've done what is necessary, had the conversation, and then figured it out, and that's fine. But the point we are talking about here is really about having the conversation in the first place and not holding back. Am I right, Ranjani? Are we on the same page?
We are. But to Shubham's point, right? I feel like in general, as humans, we have this tendency to move away from what is not right, right? Like
Yes.
if you're uncomfortable, you
Yes.
want to move away. It's easier for us to do that, and that's where I think that tendency comes from. But I think
Correct.
what one needs to do consciously is evaluate like the pros and cons of how, like if I'm not clear about what matters to me. So, for example, maybe what matters to me in a new role is not just remuneration, also like a work-life balance and having the time to spend with my family. But if I'm going to check box on a remuneration, all right, I'm getting a raise, so let me move. But if it's going to take like another 4 hours away of my time, that's also monetarily costing me, right? It's time
Correct.
and therefore money.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, being in.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Shivkant is agreeing with some of the points we made earlier, that privileges, respect, and leadership of
Mhm.
women at work, be it tech or non-tech, it depends on the skills. Then this goes for men as well, and the organization, because some companies are better at empowering women, giving preferences, special benefits,
Mhm.
flexible working hours, and being equitable, right, across gender and across various needs. That's a great observation, Shivkant. I would completely agree that there are, certain organizations that are doing way more and way better to ensure that we have a more equitable workplace. What are some practices that you see, Ranjini, that you see some good organizations doing to make things more equitable?
Yeah, I think first of all, I want to acknowledge what he called out, right? And I think it's better in general with tech. Tech is like kind of higher up the value chain, if I can call it that, right? Because that's like one of the sectors which has moved ahead. So yes, they are way better, right? And I talk about this because I know my mom worked in a government organization, and
Yeah.
she's had like I can't even imagine how it would have been for her to have a full-time job. I had a working mom, right? So like 30 years ago, how she did it, like kudos to her, right? I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. But kind of getting back to your point, I think a lot of companies, right, have this clarity that I'm going to reiterate this, that diversity is not the right thing to do. It also makes business sense. I remember this book. There's this book called Diversity Bonus: How
Mhm.
Great Teams Pay Off in a Knowledge Economy. So what this person does, the author does, is it makes a strong case based on research that increasing diversity has long
Mm.
been promoted as like the right thing to do, right? But he says that that notion itself is very simplistic, and it ignores the benefits of how much inclusion can bring into the organization. So that I think is what has changed, or at least changing in certain organizations, right? Where
Yeah.
you're not looking at diversity as like a checkbox item. It's not just like I need to do this, right?
Yeah.
Versus focus on actually ensuring that that is ingrained in your culture, ingrained in, like I was talking about, unconscious bias trainings, making sure that the culture is inclusive, having that top-down clarity, bringing teams together. I think all of that is something which they're doing beyond like what we do here around initiatives around bringing women back to work, ensuring that they do have the opportunities. A lot of organizations also have like internal mentorship programs, career pathways, right? How do you move from, say, product management to analytics, shadow programs? So I think there's so much which is happening. And again, I'm speaking from the tech space. That's what uh, I've been in, but definitely aware of the privilege of being in a space like this versus non-tech.
Mm. It's not always easy, is it? Because not everyone comes from that place and they need to, it's
Yeah.
about where you begin that journey from, I guess. Harsha's got an interesting question for us. If I could just paraphrase that a bit and just ask you about the last bit about what to do when people, especially during offer letters, ask about family and kids and personal situations. I've even heard things about, pregnancy during interviews, and people being either too nosy or probably even unethical at some points. I'm sure people have all kinds of stories in these regards.
Yeah.
What's your experience with this?
Honestly, I have such a visceral reaction to something like this, right? Because it astounds me so much that you judge a person based on whether they have kids or they will have kids. My friend once told me, this was quite a long time ago, that she interviewed with the company and they were like, "What's your family plans like? Are you planning?" She just got married. Are you planning to have kids? That's such a personal question. I would say intrusion of privacy, rather, right? Now, the bigger question for me, again, from my perspective, is that the kind of company and culture you would want to be working for, right? So that's what I would say, right? That would be a huge red flag for me. I wouldn't even consider something like that.
Mm.
I've had, in the past, quite a while ago, interviewed with companies where I've gone through almost like 4, 5 rounds without meeting one single women leader. That was a red flag for me. Do I want to work in a place which doesn't value inclusion? Maybe not, right? So I think it's one thing I would highly recommend is when you're picking companies, also look at whether that company's values aligns with your personal values. Because if there's a dissonance there, you're definitely going to get into trouble later, right? So
So,
that's a good checkpoint.
yeah, you got to look more than just the job and the task and everything and go all the way to the value systems. And I'm
Absolutely.
also recognizing that we have the privilege of saying no sometimes, right? We have the privilege of saying this is not a company I want to work for, and that might not be accessible to everybody, especially if you're
Exactly.
coming back to work after a break, right?
Yeah.
And which is where one of the ideas that I kind of talk about and kind of almost recommend is having some kind of backup fund or a backup strategy or something that you go back to. For example, I teach sales negotiations, and there is an idea called BATNA, BATNA. It's called the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which
Yep.
basically means that you go to buy a car, you go to the shop.
Yep.
uh, you feel like you have to somehow make a deal with the person, but you don't know. You came in your old car, you go back home in your old car. No, the
Mm,
going back to old car is your batna, right? But we
mm,
forget that and somehow do a bad deal and somehow buy a car and come. But it should be very conscious
mm.
about having a best alternative,
Yeah.
and creating that alternative, creating a nest egg, having some cash in the bank, building that up, putting yourself in a position where you don't have to say yes. That is a superpower.
I
I'm
said,
taking I'm taking a career coach perspective here, saying it is an absolute superpower to be able to say no, right?
yeah. Oh,
And you can,
absolutely.
yeah,
That's a no, that's a real brilliant point, right? So I keep hearing about, oh, you know what, will this is this an area which may get automated? Should I be worried, right? Rather than ask that, I would think about what are the other things I can do to upskill myself, because maybe 1 year down the line, even if I'm in a position, I probably have choices, right? So getting to those choices, like you said, rightly, building those choices is absolute superpower. And I think everyone should kind of work towards having those
work
also.
towards that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We should work towards having superpowers. Fantastic. So yeah, so let's go back to your own journey, Ranjini. Would love to go deeper into that before we close today. Of understanding, if you look back at your journey, what did you do well? What advice would you have for others who want to, become a leader in AI, become visibly a leader in AI? The work you're doing for other women, you're contributing back, giving back as well. All that you're doing, what did you do well? What did you learn that you'll pass off as advice to others who are kind of maybe kicking off or on that journey?
Yeah, maybe I'll divide this into two parts, right? I can talk about like my journey, and then I'll talk about what would I recommend also to women,
Sure.
right? Again, I'm very aware that I'm like a work in progress. That's something I keep telling my husband, right? I have areas I know I need to improve upon. There are areas which I've probably improved upon. So that's something I'm very aware of, right? So I'm not going to say I'm already like doing great and all of that. But having said that, I think one thing I've consciously been very aware of is to improve myself. Like I think that's one of my precepts, right? Being better is something which is a core value for me. Am I better today than yesterday? Not necessarily am I better than someone else, right? So that is something which I focused on. Now, how did that happen? I think initially, like I was telling you, my parents come from a very non-tech background, but for me, I've been attracted to tech like from a very young age, right? So anything I didn't know, I couldn't ask my parents. I used to turn to books, right? I that's why I read so much. Like every answer, I look at it for like let me find a book for it, right? And then once I think one of my mentors told me, Rajini is so over indexed on books, right? Like for everything I'll say, I'll go find it in a book. So he
Everything.
said, but talk to people, find out, do things and find out from people. I said, yeah, that's like a penny drop, right? I'm like, yeah, I should do that. So then you know what? I started talking to people. I made it a conscious choice that every Friday I will talk to someone, right? And I did this over a period of time, and it helps a lot, right? It helps improve your mindset, it helps you learn new frameworks. I think all of that is great. That's with respect to like leadership and how do you improve as a person. But again, as an individual, it's important to have your skills in place. That's like a hygiene factor. If you don't have skills in place, everything else is just around it, right? So core skills is something you continue to have to improve and upskill. And one thing I've focused on again is hiring people better than myself. Like at any point in time, I'm not the smartest data scientist in the room, right? Now, what happens in that process is, you can grow because you're getting your team to grow. You can grow, right? If that's one, and B, there are always people who question why, and they kind of bring new ideas. So you're kind of forced to learn because you have to kind of keep up, right? So that's something I've done consciously, even though sometimes it can feel uncomfortable, right? Because you're always having to be the person who knows the least, but it's definitely helpful in the long run, right? So that those are kind of things which I've done personally. Yeah.
Was forced
Uh,
to learn because I've just written these down in the comments, by the way. And the last one is basically saying was forced to learn because I had to keep up. What a wonderful, isn't that the
yeah.
whole thing of you're the average of the people you're with? So you keep on kind of lifting
Right?
your average, don't you?
Absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. I think it's very critical that way, right? So again, so that's one part of it. Now, what would I recommend? And I think I was talking to someone about this, and I keep calling this the 5C model, right? Because I was mentoring someone, and I remember
Okay.
telling her the 5C model. So I do want to share this, right? Now, again, this is for like all women, not just women in tech or women in AI per se. I think first thing is connect, right? It's so important to put yourself out there, showcase your capabilities, connect with others, chart a career path, right? Which means nurture the network not only when you need it, right? So that's one,
Very
connecting
true.
with, right? So that's one. Constantly learn. I cannot stress this enough, right? One thing I feel I don't know enough is Web3, and that's something I know will change the ecosystem in a few
Yes,
years' time. So that's
indeed.
something I've learned, right? So it's important that we, in this remote first knowledge economy, it's very different, Sham. Maybe I'm digressing, but see, think about
No,
it.
no,
100 years ago,
it's true.
uh, it was like people were told do A, do B, do C, right? You know, it is an industrial era. So you do A, then you do B, then do C. But in a knowledge first economy, I cannot tell someone do A, do B, do C. I expect them to figure it out. I expect them to work with ambiguity, which means that you need to constantly learn and be capable of working with
You need to
ambiguity,
learn
right?
how to learn. You need to learn how to
Exactly.
learn. It's not about becoming a certain thing. And
Yeah.
people keep telling me, are you settled? Are you settled? It kind of
Yeah.
drives me nuts because I'm
Right.
not settled. I'm continuously learning.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the only way to stay relevant is to constantly work towards
Fantastic. Yeah.
right? So that's second. That's constantly learn. Third is courage, and this I feel is a huge challenge as well because we spoke about how women are less likely to ask for a referral, to ask for a raise. It's important to have a voice and speak up for yourself. Like if you don't
Hmm.
advocate for yourself, no one else is going to do that for you, right? So speak up for
Indeed.
yourself. Have courage. Call for help, right? Again, I think one challenge I hear is, oh, where's the time? Where's the time? Where's the time? Figure out what's important for you, what is probably not a deal breaker for you. Like I know that cooking is not my passion. I don't care, right? As long as I'm eating healthy, I'm good with it. Is that something I can delegate? Yes, absolutely. Am I going to feel guilty that my daughter's not cooking, eating food which I bake, like a cake I
But
bake? I don't
honestly,
care, right? As long as she's eating healthy, that's perfectly fine. So I think you need to kind of figure out your deal breakers and wherever possible, ask for help. I shamelessly ask for help on things which are not my priority areas, right? Can you do this?
good.
Can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? So I think asking for help, call for help, right, is so important to do because you have 24 hours. You need to prioritize what is important to you, right? And finally, the fifth C, confidence to dream big and believe in yourself, right? Cliched though it sounds, most women I speak to, it's not like technical skills are the gap, right? Most of the time, it's a confidence gap in terms of what
Right.
in case I ask for this team lead position and I don't get it. But if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So I'd rather ask and get a no versus not ask at all, right? So I think
Yes.
dream big and being open to fail, that I think is hugely important, right? And having that courage to do that, yeah. So those are my five C's.
Wow. You're true to form, okay? You're true to form. I asked you for tips and you've given me an entire model that you've come up with. This is amazing. So many nuggets, so many nuggets. I'm going to just, before we close, start with, I've put them in the chat for captured and, tons of people are already liking it. Network before you have to. Oh my goodness, that is so important. The number of people, at least in my practice, who come and say, I need to change now, but I actually don't know who to call because you've not nurtured it, you've not built it. So do it now, folks. If gender agnostic, anyone, if you are, you know, I've heard all kinds of positions on this. I'll do my job and my work will speak for itself. Yes,
Good.
until it is no longer enough.
Yeah,
Until
yeah.
you feel the need to pick up the phone and call somebody and do the work now. Start small. Your old college buddies, your old colleagues, just kind of be in touch, stay in touch, say hello once in a few months. It's a good thing. Give first and then take. That was amazing. That was another one. Oh, I can actually show them here. Give me a second. Network before you have to was number one. Give first and then take was another. Then you said you are a work in progress. I love that because when we realize that we've not really settled and this is not it, you can
Mm.
always grow, you can always get better. If you're looking to grow in AI, it needs to start with the mindset that you can grow, and we are actually works in progress. Love what you said about am I better than yesterday? Again, putting you in that learning zone. This thing I really like. You said you speak to new people every Friday. Is that what you said?
Week, usually a Friday, but every week, right? I've been doing this for like almost 2, 3 years now. Uh,
Wow, that's 100 people, right? That's like 100 weeks.
I talk to like people. I talk to a lot of people, Sham, right? I think specifically because you remember I told you I was so over indexed on books. I kind of thought, okay, now I'm going to go the other end and talk to people, right? So,
Correct it the other way. Yes, absolutely. Oh,
yeah.
this was also amazing. You were forced to learn because you had to keep up, which is another fantastic nugget. So put yourself in positions where This reminds me of what my old ex-CEO at ARM used to say. He's now the CEO of Rolls-Royce, Warren East. He used to say, if you keep on hiring people better than you, you'll be a company of giants. So please always surround yourself with people who, are doing bigger things, or, maybe aspirationally, you are aspirationally looking up to them.
Yeah.
And of course, tada, grand reveal, the 5C model. What a model. Connect, constantly learn, courage, call for help, and confidence to dream big. Rajni, thank you so much for kind of consolidating that. That's another C. You can say that maybe. I'm adding my C to the 5C model, consolidating it into a lovely model for us. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of conclude on and say for our guests before we close today?
No, I think I really enjoyed this conversation, Shyam. I think that at the end of the day, all of us are good people. All of us intend to do the right things. Um, Personally, though, if I have to leave you with one thing, I'm going to reiterate this, right? Don't self-reject. If you don't ask, the answer is always no, right? So please ask.
Let me put that as the last one here. Don't self-reject.
Yeah,
Don't reject. Please ask.
yeah.
Fantastic. And that's up there on the screen for everybody. Don't self-reject. Please ask. And if I'll add my little bit of a twist to that as well, is stop overthinking and start doing. If you want to network, if you want to pick up the phone, if you want to apply for a new job, if you want to just reach out to Ranjini, don't or me, just come and drop us a hi saying, we were on your LinkedIn live, enjoyed it. Make a start. Hope to reach out and get to know more of you soon. Ranjini, thank you. This is the fastest hour of my life, I think. It was a great conversation. Thank you for making the time for us. Until next time.
Thank you, Shyam. Really enjoyed this conversation and have a great evening, the rest of you. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye.